"It is quay, your grace, not qui," said the governess, quietly, from the foot of the table, "since you are referring to the lady, and the lady is feminine. Though I dare say the error is natural in a man unaccustomed to considering that a woman might understand him." The Duke of Wrexham set down his wine, and the whole dinner table of Lord Fenwick's held its breath. For the Duke had just done a thing that gentlemen of his stamp did without thinking. He had made, in Latin, a small cutting remark, a dismissive little aside to the gentleman beside him, about the tiresomeness of blue-stocking women, delivered in Latin, precisely because a scholarly language was a safe place to be rude, no lady present being expected to follow it. He had glanced, as he said it, toward the poor governess at the foot of the table, a Miss Beatrice Hale, companion governess to Lord Fenwick's daughters, present to make up the numbers and generally to be invisible, because she had, earlier in the evening, ventured an opinion the Duke had found presumptuous in a woman of her station, and his Latin aside had been, in fact, about her. A veiled little insult, safely encoded. A gentleman's private sneer at a blue-stocking who did not know her place. Except that Miss Beatrice Hale had followed every word of it, and had corrected his grammar, and, in correcting his grammar, had made unmistakably clear that she had understood not only the Latin, but the insult it carried, had caught him out twice over, in his error and in his rudeness both, and had done it in a voice of such cool, precise composure that there was no mistaking it for anything but exactly what it was. The most educated person at the table, quietly informing a duke that he had been both ungrammatical and unkind, and that she had noticed both. "I beg your pardon?" said the Duke of Wrexham, who was not accustomed to being corrected on anything, least of all his Latin, least of all by a governess. "Your Grace referred to a lady," Miss Hale said, with the same unhurried composure, and used the masculine relative pronoun, which is incorrect. The feminine is required. It is a small error, and I would not ordinarily correct a gentleman's grammar at a dinner table, which is not done. But I confess I made an exception in this case, because the sentence in which the error occurred was itself an insult to blue-stocking women, and I could not help but observe from the direction of your Grace's glance, to me in particular, and I found that a man who insults a woman in Latin, on the assumption that she is too ignorant to understand him, ought at the very least to be insulting her in correct Latin, and that it would be a dereliction of my scholarly conscience to let both the rudeness and the grammatical error pass unremarked. So I have remarked on them. The rudeness I forgive, your Grace. Gentlemen are often rude to governesses, and I am used to it. The grammar I cannot forgive quite so easily, because bad Latin offends me more than bad manners, having devoted rather more of my life to the one than the other. Quay, your Grace, not qui. Do have some more wine." The silence at Lord Fenwick's table achieved a quality that the guests would describe to one another for years. And the Duke of Wrexham, caught out in his rudeness and his bad grammar both, by a governess, before the whole table, did a thing that surprised the company nearly as much as the correction itself. He began, after a frozen moment, to laugh. It was not the laugh of a man covering embarrassment. It was a real laugh, startled out of him, delighted despite himself, because the Duke of Wrexham was, under his arrogance, a genuinely educated man who loved the classics, and he had just been out-Latined, comprehensively and correctly, by a governess at the foot of a dinner table, and some honest part of him found it not humiliating, but magnificent. "It is quay," he admitted, to the astonished table. "She is quite right. It is quay, and I knew it the moment she said it, and I am wrong, and I have been wrong out loud in Latin in front of everyone, which is a great deal worse than being wrong in English, and I am corrected." He looked down the length of the table at Miss Beatrice Hale, and there was something in his look now that had not been there before. Not affront, but a sharp, arrested, fascinated attention. "And you are right about the other thing too, Miss Hale, the rudeness. I did make the remark about you, and in Latin, precisely because I assumed you would not understand it, which was ungentlemanly, and, as it turns out, catastrophically mistaken. So I owe you 2 apologies, one for the insult, and one, which pains me more, for having imagined that a woman who could correct my Latin would fail to catch my rudeness. I withdraw both the insult and the assumption, and I find I should very much like to know where a governess learned better Latin than a duke." "From my father, your grace," Miss Hale said. "A poor scholar, a clergyman, who had no son, and so taught his daughter, there being no one else to teach, and who lived to regret it, because a woman with Latin is a woman no one knows what to do with, too educated to be a comfortable servant, and too poor to be anything else, fit for nothing the world values. A blue-stocking governess who corrects dukes at dinner, and will die a spinster for her trouble. My Latin has brought me nothing but the pleasure of the thing itself, and the occasional satisfaction of correcting a gentleman who assumed I could not. It is a useless accomplishment in a woman, everyone agrees. But it is mine, and I love it, and I will not pretend to be ignorant of it to spare a duke's blushes, because I have spent my whole life being asked to be less than I am for other people's comfort, and I find, at the foot of your host's table, that I have run entirely out of willingness to do it. So there is your answer. My father taught me, and I do not regret it, whatever it has cost me, because a mind is worth having, even when the world has no use for it, and I would rather be a poor governess who knows her Latin than a comfortable fool who does not." And the Duke of Wrexham looked at the poor governess who had corrected his Latin and defended her own mind, and refused to be less than she was for his comfort, and felt the arrested fascination deepen into something he had not felt in years of dinners full of accomplished, agreeable women who never corrected anything, because Beatrice Hale was not agreeable, and did not defer, and had a better mind than he did, and would not hide it, and he had spent his whole life bored to death by women who told him what he wished to hear, and here at last was one who told him he was wrong, in Latin, and was right. There was one afternoon of that swift, extraordinary week that the Duke kept, ever after, as the moment he stopped arguing with himself about the speed of it. He had come to Fenwick's with a volume of Catullus under his arm, a transparent pretext, but Beatrice had stopped pretending to be deceived by his pretexts after the second day, and they had fallen, within minutes, into a ferocious argument about a disputed line, the kind of argument the Duke had not had since his university years, and had never once had with a woman. And Beatrice had pressed him, and he had pressed back, and she had produced an interpretation so unexpected and so obviously right that the Duke had stopped mid-sentence, defeated, and simply stared at her. "You have just seen something in that line," he said, "that I have read 100 times and never saw, and that I do not believe any of the great commentators have seen either, and you have seen it in an afternoon, in a borrowed library, in the intervals of teaching Fenwick's daughters their French. Do you understand what you are, Beatrice Hale? You are wasted, comprehensively, criminally wasted. That mind of yours ought to be at Cambridge, or corresponding with the scholars of Europe, or writing the commentary that corrects the great commentators, and instead, it is teaching French irregular verbs to 2 girls who will forget them within a year, because you were born a woman and poor, and the world has no place for a female classicist, and so the finest classical mind I have encountered in 20 years is being spent on the schoolroom. It is the plainest waste I have ever seen. It makes me angry, and I did not expect to be made angry by a governess's Latin, and yet here I am." And Beatrice had looked at him, and something had shifted in her wary composure, because no one had ever been angry on her behalf about the waste of her mind. The world had only ever told her the mind was the waste, the deformity, the thing that had ruined her prospects. "You are the first person," she said slowly, "who has ever called it a waste that my mind is not used, rather than a waste that I have it. Do you understand the difference? My whole life, everyone, my well-meaning aunt, the families I have served, the world entire, has treated my learning as the problem. A poor girl with Latin, how unfortunate, how unmarriageable. What a pity her father filled her head with useless things, instead of teaching her to be an agreeable ornament who might have caught a husband. The waste, in their telling, was the education itself, poured into a vessel the world had no use for, and you have just turned it entirely around. You are angry not that I was educated, but that I am not used, not that I have the mind, but that the world wastes it. No one has ever said that to me. No one has ever, in my whole life, treated my mind as a good thing, being wasted, rather than a bad thing to be regretted. And I find," her voice was not quite steady, I find it undoes me rather more than I am comfortable with, your grace, because it is the thing I have needed to hear my whole life, and despaired of ever hearing, that the fault is not in me for having the mind, but in a world that will not use it. Thank you. It is a small thing perhaps to you. It is not a small thing to me. It is very nearly everything. And the Duke of Wrexham, hearing this, understood that he had reached something in her that no argument about Catullus could account for, the deep old wound of a woman taught to see her own gift as her ruin, and understood, too, that he wanted, with a fierceness that startled him, to spend his life being the answer to that wound, the person who prized the mind the world had told her to be ashamed of. It is not a small thing to me either, he said. It is, I begin to think, the largest thing there is, to find the one mind that matches your own, and watch the world wasted in a schoolroom. I will not apologize for the anger, Beatrice. It is the truest thing I have felt in years, and I give you fair warning. I do not intend to let the waste continue, whatever else comes of this week. A mind like yours will be used, if I have anything to say about it, and I find I very much want to have something to say about it, which is a larger wish than I have any right to, on 4 days' acquaintance. And I shall say no more of it today, except that I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want to stop the waste of you. And Beatrice had turned back to Catullus, flustered for the first time that week, and the argument had resumed. But something had changed in it, and they both knew it, and the change was the beginning of the end of her wariness. He called at Lord Fenwick's the next morning, on a transparent pretext, and asked to speak with Miss Hale, and thus began the strangest and swiftest week of the Duke of Wrexham's life. To understand what that week meant to Beatrice Hale, one must understand what her learning had cost her. For it had cost her, in the plain reckoning of the world, nearly everything. She had been the only child of a poor country clergyman, a fine scholar buried in a small parish, who had wanted a son to teach, and been given a daughter instead, and had, unusually, and to the scandal of his neighbors, taught her anyway, everything he knew, Latin and Greek and history and philosophy, not out of any principle about the education of women, but simply because he loved learning, and loved his child, and had no one else to pour it into. And Beatrice had drunk it up, and proved brilliant, and the two of them had spent her childhood in the happiest of companionships, reading Virgil by the fire, arguing Tacitus over supper, a poor scholar and his gifted daughter, perfectly content. And then her father had died, and Beatrice had discovered, at 19, exactly what her education was worth in the world's market. Nothing. Worse than nothing. For a poor gentlewoman's only respectable path was marriage or service, and Beatrice's learning had spoiled her for both. It had spoiled her for marriage, because gentlemen did not want a wife who knew more Latin than they did. A bluestocking was a thing to be avoided, a woman who would embarrass a man before his friends, and the modest suitors a poor parson's daughter might have hoped for fled from a girl who corrected their grammar. And it had spoiled her for comfortable service, because an overeducated governess made her employers uneasy, was too plainly cleverer than the family that hired her, and had to hide half her mind to keep her place, and even then was resented for the half that showed. She was, in the world's eyes, a ruined thing, too educated to marry, too educated to serve comfortably, fit for nothing the world valued, a blue-stocking spinster governess who would grow old correcting other people's children and die alone, all because a loving father had taught his daughter Latin. She had made her peace with it mostly, in the hard years since, had learned to hide her learning, to be less, to swallow her corrections and dim her mind for other people's comfort, because it was the price of keeping a place, and a woman with no fortune must keep her place. She had learned to be the invisible agreeable governess the world demanded, and had buried the scholar her father made, and had told herself the scholar was dead, a childhood thing, gone with her father into the grave. And she had believed it, until a duke made a rude remark in bad Latin at a dinner table, and something in her, some buried unkillable thing, had refused to let the error pass, and the scholar her father made had risen up out of the grave where the world had buried her and said, clearly, into the silence, "Quae, your grace." Not key. She had not planned it. It had cost her, she assumed, her place. A governess who corrects a duke does not stay a governess long, but she had not been able to stop it, because the scholar was not dead after all, only buried, and buried things claw their way out when they must. And now that same Duke was calling every day, seeking out the buried scholar, delighting in her, wanting the very thing the world had told her to hide. And Beatrice Hale, who had spent 5 years being told her mind was her ruin, found herself, in the strangest week of her life, being courted for it, and did not know how to bear the reversal, and guarded herself fiercely against it, precisely because it was the thing she had wanted her whole life, and had taught herself she could never have. For the Duke, having discovered at that dinner table the one thing he had given up hoping to find, a mind that could meet his own and would not defer to it, could not stay away, and did not try. He came every day. He came with books and arguments and Latin and Greek, and he and Beatrice Hale fell, within hours, into the particular intoxication of two well-matched minds that have each been starved of a real match. They argued about Virgil and Tacitus, about translation and history and philosophy, about everything, sparring and laughing and pressing each other. And the Duke discovered that Beatrice was not merely educated, but brilliant, better read than he was, sharper, quicker, entirely unintimidated, and that arguing with her was the most alive he had felt in years. He had spent his life among women schooled to be agreeable, to draw out a gentleman and flatter his cleverness. And here was a woman who told him flatly when he was wrong, who bested him in argument and did not trouble to soften it, who treated his rank as an irrelevance and his mind as a worthy opponent. And it was, to a man dying of being deferred to, water in a desert. And Beatrice, for her part, found herself, against all her hard sense, enjoying it. She had spent her life being asked to hide her learning, to be less, to spare gentlemen the discomfort of a woman who knew more than they did. And here was a Duke who sought out her learning, who wanted to be corrected, who delighted in being bested, who treated her mind not as an embarrassing deformity, but as the most interesting thing about her. To be valued for the very thing the world had told her was a useless deformity in a woman was a heady, dangerous experience, and Beatrice knew it was dangerous, and guarded against it, because a poor governess who lets herself be charmed by a Duke's attention to her mind is a woman setting herself up to be a season's amusement, a curiosity, the clever blue-stocking a jaded Duke plays with and discards. For that was her fear, and she named it to him plainly, on the 4th or 5th day, because plainness was her nature. "I know what I am to you," she said, in the middle of an argument about Horace. "I am a novelty, a clever governess, a talking curiosity, a blue-stocking who can spar in Latin, a thing you have not encountered before and find diverting, the way one finds diverting a dog that can count. You are bored, Your Grace, bored of agreeable women who flatter you, and I am the opposite of agreeable, and so I am interesting, for now, the way anything novel is interesting. But novelty fades. In a week or a month, you will have had your fill of the clever governess. The diversion will pale, and you will go back to your world, and I will go back to correcting Lord Fenwick's daughter's French, and I will have been, for a little while, a Duke's amusement. I do not say this bitterly. I say it clearly, because I would rather see it clearly now than let myself imagine it as anything else and be hurt later. You do not want me, Your Grace. You want a novelty, and I happen to be it. And I have too much respect for my own mind, the mind you claim to admire, to let it be a jaded man's plaything, however flattering the play. So enjoy the arguments while they divert you, but do not mistake them, and do not let me mistake them, for anything more than a clever man being briefly amused by a clever woman beneath his notice." And the Duke of Wrexham, who might have protested prettily, did something better. He took her seriously, and answered the fear on its own terms, because he had learned already that Beatrice Hale despised pretty protestations and respected only the truth. "You are right to fear it," he said. "It is a real danger, and it happens, and I will not insult you by pretending men of my stamp do not do exactly what you describe, collect a clever woman as a novelty, and discard her when the novelty fades. So let me not protest that I am different. Let me instead tell you the one thing that I think distinguishes this from that, and you may weigh it. A novelty amuses you and then palls, because a novelty is a surface, a trick, a curiosity, a thing that surprises once and then is known. But I have been arguing with you for 5 days, Beatrice, and you do not pall. You deepen. Every argument reveals more, not less. I leave each day not sated but hungrier, wanting the next argument more than the last. That is not how novelty behaves. Novelty is a candle that burns bright and gutters. What I feel is the opposite, a fire that grows with feeding. And I have lived long enough and been bored by enough novelties to know the difference from the inside. The clever women I collected and discarded palled within a week because there was nothing under the cleverness but more cleverness, a performance. There is no performance in you. There is a whole vast mind and a whole vast character under it, and the more of it I see, the more there is to see, and a man does not tire of that. He falls into it. I am not amused by you, Beatrice. I am falling in love with you, which is a different and far more inconvenient thing, and I did not intend it, and it alarms me considerably, and it is not going to pall, because it is not novelty. It is the plain astonishment of a man who spent his life starved for a mind like his own, and has finally, at a dinner table, over a Latin error, found one better. Beatrice Hale stared at him, the argument about Horace entirely forgotten. You cannot be falling in love with me, she said. It has been 5 days. It has been 5 days, the Duke agreed, and I am aware that is absurd, and I have interrogated it thoroughly, being a rational man, and it survives the interrogation, which alarms me more than anything. 5 days, Beatrice, but they have been 5 days of the realest conversation of my life, with the only person who has ever met my mind as an equal, and I find that 5 days of the real thing has done what 5 years of the ordinary thing never did. I am not going to apologize for the speed of it. I am going to ask you to consider that speed is not the same as shallowness, that a thing can be sudden and also true, and that 2 well-matched minds that recognize each other may do in 5 days what 2 ill-matched ones cannot do in 5 years. That is all. I am not proposing today. You would refuse me, rightly, as a madman. But I am telling you the truth of where I stand, because you have taught me these 5 days that you deal only in truth. And the truth is that I am in love with you, Miss Beatrice Hale. 5 days and a Latin error into our acquaintance, and I do not expect it to pall, because I have never in my life felt anything less like a passing amusement. He proposed a week after the dinner, exactly as the story would always be told, and if the speed of it scandalized society, it did not scandalize Beatrice, because by then she understood that a week of the real thing was not the same as a week of the ordinary thing, and that she had come, in that week, to love him as helplessly and as certainly as he loved her. But she did not say yes at once, because there was a fear left, and it was not the fear of novelty. He had answered that, but the older, harder fear of the gulf itself. You want to marry me, she said, when he had asked her, plainly, on the 7th day, in Lord Fenwick's library among the books that had been their whole courtship. A duke, marrying a governess, a penniless blue-stocking, with nothing but Latin, and no dowry, and no name. Do you understand what the world will make of it? What it will make of me? A duchess who was a governess, who corrected you at a dinner table and snared you in a week. I will be a scandal, a joke, the blue-stocking who bewitched the Duke of Wrexham with her Latin, and every drawing-room in England will laugh at us both, at you for being caught by a clever nobody, and at me for the presumption of it. And more than that, Julian, I am afraid of what I would be, in your world. A duchess is meant to be ornamental, agreeable, to grace a table, and defer to her husband, and never, ever correct him in Latin before his guests. And I cannot be that. You know I cannot. It is the very thing you claim to love in me, that I will not be less than I am. But the thing you love in a governess at a dinner table may be the thing that mortifies you in a duchess at your own. I will not stop being what I am, Julian. I will correct your Latin for the rest of your life. I will argue with you before your guests and best you, and not soften it. I will be a blue-stocking duchess, an embarrassment, a wife who will not be ornamental, and I am afraid that the mind you love now, across a governess's dinner table, you will come to resent across your own. when it embarrasses you before the world you must live in. That is my fear, not that you do not love my mind now, that you will not survive being married to it." And the Duke of Wrexham, who had proposed to a woman who was refusing him for fear of being too much, gave her the answer that won her. "I have spent my whole life," he said, "in a world that wanted me to marry an ornament, an agreeable, deferential, Latinless duchess, who would grace my table and never correct me and bore me into an early grave. That world is exactly the thing I am trying to escape, Beatrice, and you are the escape. You are afraid I will come to resent your mind before my guests. I am telling you that I want nothing so much as a wife who will correct my Latin before my guests, that the image you paint as a horror, a blue-stocking duchess who argues and bests me, and will not be ornamental, is not my nightmare but my dream, the exact opposite of the ornamental tedium I have dreaded my whole life. Let the drawing rooms laugh. They laugh at everything. Their laughter is worth nothing. It is the laughter of exactly the ornamental, agreeable world I am marrying you to escape. I would rather be laughed at with you, with a wife who corrects my Latin and argues me to a standstill, and is, plainly, cleverer than I am, than admired with an ornament who never says a true or interesting thing in 40 years. You are afraid of being too much. Beatrice, there is no such thing as too much. Of you, there is only exactly enough, at last, after a lifetime of too little, and I am not going to survive being married to your mind. I am going to be saved by it, every day, from the ornamental death that was the only marriage my world had on offer, before you corrected my Latin and showed me there was another kind. Marry me, be too much. Correct me before my guests until we are both old. I am asking for precisely the thing you are afraid to give, because it is the only thing I have ever wanted and despaired of finding, a wife I can talk to and be bested by, and never, ever bore or be bored. Say yes, and then tell me I am wrong about something, in Latin, because I have missed it since yesterday." And Beatrice Hale, poor governess, blue-stocking, too much, looked at the Duke, who wanted her precisely for the mind the world had told her was a useless deformity, and let the last fear go, and laughed, and wept, and said yes. "Yes," she said, "you impossible man. Yes, and you are wrong about Horace. You have been wrong about Horace all week, and I have been too polite to press it, and if we are to be married I shall press it, at length, for the rest of your life, starting tonight. Yes, I will be your too much duchess. I will correct your Latin before kings, and I will love you for the rest of my life, for the one thing no one else ever did, for wanting me to be more, not less, when the whole world spent my whole life asking me to be less. Yes, Julian, yes." And the Duke of Wrexham drew the governess who had corrected his Latin into his arms in Lord Fenwick's library, a week to the day after she had told him it was quay and not quay, and the bored, ornamental death he had dreaded his whole life was cancelled forever, replaced by the prospect of a lifetime of being gloriously, delightedly, correctly bested. They were married with a speed that scandalized the ton and a happiness that eventually silenced it, and the drawing rooms did laugh, at first. The Duke of Wrexham caught in a week by a blue-stocking governess, imagine. But the laughter did not last, because it is very difficult to go on laughing at a marriage so plainly, so enviably happy, and because the new Duchess of Wrexham turned out to be not the ridiculous figure the ton expected, but something it had not reckoned with, a woman of such formidable learning, and such quick wit, and such complete indifference to the drawing-room's opinion, that she could not be laughed at for long, only, eventually, admired, and then sought after, as the cleverest woman in London, whose conversation the wittiest men in the kingdom came to prize, and the dullest ones learned to fear. For the Duchess of Wrexham never became ornamental, and never tried, and her husband never wanted her to. She corrected his Latin before his guests, exactly as she had promised, for the rest of their lives, corrected him, argued with him, bested him, and was corrected and argued with, and occasionally, grudgingly, bested in return, because the Duke was no fool himself, and rose, under the daily exercise of her mind, to heights he had never reached in his ornamental years. Their table became the most sought after in London, not for its food or its grandeur, but for its conversation, because the Duke and Duchess of Wrexham argued across it like two duelists who adored each other, and to be present was to watch two first-rate minds spar for the sheer joy of it, and no one who witnessed it ever again quite believed that a duchess ought to be ornamental. And the Duchess used her position, as these heroines do, for the cause nearest her own history, the education of women. She endowed schools where girls were taught Latin and Greek and mathematics, and all the useless accomplishments the world denied them. She took under her wing clever poor girls, whose learning, like her own, had made them unmarriageable and unemployable, too educated to be comfortable servants, and too poor to be anything else. And she made it her particular mission to prove, by the plain fact of her own celebrated happiness, that a woman's mind was not a deformity to be hidden, but a glory to be prized, and that somewhere out there was a man wise enough to want a wife who could correct his Latin, because she had found one, against all the odds and all the world's counsel, and she meant to make it easier for the next clever girl to find hers. "You corrected my Latin," the Duke said to her, years on, at the head of a table where they had just finished arguing, to the delight of their guests, about a fine point of Tacitus that Beatrice had, as usual, won. Before the whole of Fenwick's table, quae, not qui. You could not let it pass, my grammar or my rudeness, neither one. And it was the making of my whole life, that correction, because it showed me, in an instant, the one thing I had given up hoping to find, a woman who would not be less than she was to spare my blushes. If you had let the error pass, as a governess is supposed to let a duke's errors pass, in deference, in fear, I would never have seen you, and I would have married some agreeable ornament and bored myself to death by 40, and never known what I had missed. You could not keep silent about a Latin error. It saved us both. It is a great fault in me, Beatrice agreed, with the dry composure that had first undone him. The not keeping silent, over Latin especially. My father despaired of it. He said no man would marry a woman who corrected his grammar. He was wrong, as it turned out, though only just. It took a duke secure enough to enjoy being corrected, which is rarer than Latin, and I was lucky past all deserving to find one. But I will tell our daughters what my father should have told me. Do not hide your mind to catch a husband. Correct his Latin. If he cannot bear it, he was never worth having, and better to know at the dinner table than at the altar. And if he laughs, if he is delighted to be bested, if he wants you more for the correcting and not less, then you have found the only kind of man worth marrying, the kind secure enough to love a mind as good as his own or better. I corrected a duke's Latin before a whole table, expecting to be thought presumptuous and dismissed. Instead, I was proposed to within the week. It does not always go so, but it went so for me, and it can go so, and I will not have my daughters taught to be less than they are for fear that it will not be too much. The right man will thank you for it. Mine did, and does, every day, at this table, in the middle of losing an argument about Tacitus, and the Duke of Wrexham, who had just lost the argument about Tacitus, and could not have been happier about it, raised his glass to his too much Duchess, and the whole table laughed, and it was, as it always was at the Wrexham's table, the best conversation in England.